Yorinobu Arasaka, the patricide, the rich kid, the screw-up, and the fool, is anything but that simple. And dare I say, he is one of Cyberpunk's most tragic, heroic figures. The first time I played this game, I didn't really realize all the facts, and I didn't really notice all the details that were hiding between the lines of the story. I got duped into seeing the world from V's perspective, where I was just a down-on-my-luck merc, and it was all because of the corpo overlords and all that. But as with any great story, each review or reread or replay makes you see things that you did not realize before. Hello, my name is Liddy, and welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we discuss how and why our favorite stories shape our own. Let's get into it. Yorinobu was born in Tokyo in 1995 to Saburo Arasaka and his third wife, Michiko. As the second son of the Arasaka family, Yorinobu didn't have the same expectations of leadership that were laid upon Kei, his elder brother. But he still had access to the best education, the best technology and living conditions. Really, he wanted for nothing, and he probably lived the best quality of life on the planet. And while being a member of the Arasaka family probably wasn't the most loving family experience, Yorinobu had a deep bond with his younger sister, Hanako, a bond he especially treasured after the passing of their mother. Like Hanako, Yorinobu grew up with no idea of the extent of Arasaka's darkest ventures. And he wouldn't know until he was 21 years old, when his father took him aside and told him about the family legacy. Yorinobu, horrified to know his family's dark side, fled into the streets of Tokyo, vowing to fight against his father's work. He formed his own nomad gang, the Kotetsu no Ryu, also known as the Steel Dragons, who joined him in trying to take Arasaka down. Yorinobu worked towards this goal in Japan for years, and while his insider knowledge of the corporation came in handy, it was difficult for him and his Steel Dragons to actually make a long-lasting difference. When it all came down to it, they were just a gang in the streets of Tokyo and sometimes beyond. But to his credit, Yorinobu had quite the knack for building connections and forming strategic alliances with those who also saw an enemy in Arasaka. He was quite a thorn in his dad's side, even right up until the Fourth Corporate War. Militech actually tried to recruit Yorinobu during this time, despite his blood ties to their most major competitor. But first, before we get into that, we have to talk about one of Yorinobu's oldest promises, and certainly his most cherished goal, in all of this freedom fighting and hatred directed towards his father: the safeguarding of his sister, Hanako. Hanako and Yorinobu are super close, and I think this is due in no small part to Hanako's forced isolation in her childhood, which I get into in her video. The only other kid she probably had around consistently was her brother, as her father cut her off from the outside world. Yorinobu was very protective of his little sister, and she was often a source of sympathy and comfort whenever he was at odds with his father. Even as he cut all ties with his dad and his brother when he ran away, he still kept in contact with Hanako. They'd only meet up through the net, Hanako's only source of freedom, and they would always do so in secret. Yorinobu swore very early on in his crusade against Arasaka that he would give Hanako her freedom someday. According to lore, she never knew of this promise, and he probably didn't tell her because he knew she'd be resistant to it. As I discuss in my video on Hanako, she was raised to be loyal to Arasaka and her father, so long as he lived, at all costs. Yorinobu loved his sister, and he never stopped working towards this goal of getting his sister her freedom, something that she's never really had. And he still holds on to this goal, as we see in 2077. Keeping this promise he made to himself in mind makes the rest of his story, right up to the end of the devil ending, a real gut punch. When the Fourth Corporate War rolled in the years 2021 to 2023, Yorinobu refused to join any corporation, Militech included. But he did screw Arasaka in a really clever way. He actually lent the Japanese government a hand in nationalizing Arasaka's assets, something that almost certainly annoyed his father and his brother. But Yorinobu wasn't some hapless dreamer. I can't help but feel like Johnny Silverhand's planting of that bomb in Arasaka Tower was a wake-up call of what he had to do. The only thing that would work when it came to destroying Arasaka. Tearing it apart inside out. Yorinobu had worked for years in the streets of Tokyo, running with his gang, trying to make a dent in his father's company. And while he did have some success, which I think is important to note, like, that's kind of crazy that he managed to do what he could do with the resources that he had, he realized it just wasn't good enough. He knew he needed to be welcomed back into the fold of the family, but how would he do that after everything that he'd done? Well, his brother Kei died during the events of the Fourth Corporate War, and Yorinobu cleverly used this time of grief and vulnerability to bring himself back into the family fold. Without Kei, he was the next oldest kid, technically a prospective heir to the more traditional Saburo. Hanako was essential in this, as she's the one who softened her father towards a reconciliation. Without her, Yorinobu wouldn't have been welcomed home, but ultimately he was. And he would bide his time until his moment to destroy Arasaka from within would come. In the meantime, he formed his own faction under Arasaka's banner, the Taka faction, but he would play this political game far more carefully than before. Now, before I get any further, I feel like I should note and clarify that I don't think Yorinobu is this spotless hero with pure morals and has never done anything wrong. He has, and in that sense, that is what makes him a lot more like V, who I will also be discussing at the end of this video. But I specifically want to talk about his relationship with Evelyn Parker very briefly. Yorinobu, despite everything and his negative feelings about where he comes from, has spent a lot of his life being used to just getting whatever he wants and probably doesn't think too deep about everything. For instance, Yorinobu became connected with Evelyn through clouds, which is connected to the Tiger Claws, who are connected to the Arasakas. Anybody who's played the game and those quests with Evelyn and Judy has seen how the claws are towards the people that work for them. Evelyn's fate and how she's just sold as scrap to be abused and used is unfortunately just one small example of how bad the Clouds and the Tiger Claws can be. Maybe Yorinobu wasn't aware of the abuse that goes on at Clouds, but I feel like if you're somebody who's been running with a gang in the streets of Tokyo, you would have to know, right? In a way, he almost kind of got honeypotted by Evelyn in the sense that she used that situation and the knowledge that she had of Yorinobu's secret goings-on behind the scenes to her advantage. I don't believe that Yorinobu knew that Evelyn was working for the Voodoo Boys or that she was trying to take the relic out from under him. I think that Yorinobu is, sort of Game of Thrones reference, not as smart as he thinks he is. I think he's very clever. We've seen the way that he operates back when he was working against Arasaka in Tokyo. But even he could not plan for anything, in the same way that I think Saburo Arasaka couldn't quite plan for everything either. It's already established that Yorinobu isn't perfect, he's not a genius, and when we see him and how he operates throughout Arasaka as the questline goes on, we can see that he's kind of out of his element. He's not as canny as I think he wishes he was, otherwise I think his takedown of Arasaka would have been a sure thing and much more organized. I sort of find Yorinobu's conversation with his father a bit amusing because of what he says to his dad, that you think the world revolves around you, to paraphrase, but I feel like Yorinobu has a similar idea. It's just his father is the villain and he is the hero of this story. I mean, I definitely think Saburo is unarguably evil. He's definitely not a good guy. But I do think, unbeknownst to Yorinobu, he operates his life as if the world revolves around him. He's got some ego too, and he's like his dad. I see a lot of similarities between him and Saburo, and it's just they're two people with the same sort of weaknesses and strengths on opposite sides of the board, including opposite sides of the board in terms of experience. He's a guy who thought he was capable of far more than he was, with far less resources than he realized he needed. In another world, without his individualistic streak, I think that he would have ended up being a lot more like his father than even Kei Arasaka was. But I think the key driving force in what makes these two men ultimately different is the fact that Yorinobu does seem to be more empathetic, for sure, than his father, and we'll get to that. But anyway. By 2077, although Saburo and Yorinobu had that brief reconciliation, father and son did not get along. Apparently, it's been some years since they've actually met face to face. They were still having their intercorporate shadow wars, and Yorinobu was going in for the kill this time, as carefully as he could. Well, maybe his plans didn't involve him going literally for the kill as he ended up doing, but he did cook up a really big plan in 2077 that was supposed to be a pretty big hit to his father's plans. Using contacts that he had made at Netwatch, Yorinobu made a deal involving the prototype relic, a biochip that stored the engrams of people's consciousness. This was considered Arasaka's greatest technological achievement. And this relic in particular happened to have the engram of Johnny Silverhand, an old enemy of his father, the guy who bombed Arasaka Tower. The real question of this whole deal, though, the nature of it, is never outright confirmed. It's kind of hard to really tie it all together. So, let's try and speculate a bit, based on what we know of Yorinobu. First and foremost, Yorinobu wants to destroy Arasaka. This hasn't changed. He certainly doesn't need money, and there's never any discussion between him and Netwatch, at least that we can find, that talks about payment like that. Evelyn is the one trying to sell the relic to Netwatch, not him, as we can find on the Netwatch terminal in the GIM. So wealth is not the motivator here. One could argue that the tech, in and of itself, has some sketchy things going on, just in how it was made. If an unethical bridge needed to be crossed, you can pretty much guarantee Arasaka would cross it. You could even argue that Mikoshi as a whole might be something Netwatch would be interested in accessing, as it's basically full of sort of AIs. But I think the main thing here isn't so much the relic tech, as it is Johnny's personality. And there's a couple avenues regarding Johnny's importance in the plot that I want to discuss. First, Johnny's engram is something the Voodoo Boys desperately want. They want to contact Alt Cunningham, and Johnny is the best way to do that with the least chance of getting immediately fried by Alt. Netwatch, on the other hand, wants to take out the Voodoo Boys. They want to stop them. The Voodoo Boys are playing around with the Black Wall. It's just not a good time for anybody. Perhaps Netwatch wanted Johnny instead, maybe to lure Alt out themselves, or to stop the Voodoo Boys from doing the same. So there's that. But also, so long as there's no other copies of Johnny lying around in Mikoshi, then Arasaka wouldn't be able to talk to Alt either. When I was looking a little deeper at it, there's actually an email from Netwatch to Yorinobu that basically shows that Netwatch didn't ask for Johnny Silverhand. They were actually like, why must Johnny Silverhand be on this biochip, after Yorinobu insisted on it. And Yorinobu says that he would tell them why. We don't really find out why. So, I don't know. Did Yorinobu know somehow that Johnny was key to contacting Alt? I don't know, that feels like it's on really shaky stilts. as is right now, so maybe this theory isn't the most solid. All I can really do is speculate, and please, by all means, tell me what you think in the comments, because I'm trying to spin this out too. I'll get into more theories about the biochip and Johnny and everything in Saburo's video. I don't know, this is a puzzle, and I would love to hear what you guys think the real reason behind all of this is. There's no way Alt is just of interest to the Voodoo Boys and Netwatch alone. Alt was of great interest to Arasaka before her untimely death, and she's almost certainly of even more interest now in her AI form. One cannot deny that Alt is a very, very powerful entity. If one could shackle her, then you may very well have the whole net at your mercy. She did, after all, help create the Black Wall. Arasaka, given its motive of domination, would have jumped at the chance for this, I think, if they ever realized it. Maybe they already did, and they were working towards it. Whatever the truth, I do believe Yorinobu was doing what he thought was morally best. And I do think he enjoyed the idea of pissing off his dad on a more egotistical level. While he seems to have his heart in the right place, I think Yorinobu has a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Most rebel types kinda do. It's that level of egotism you need, I think, to be a proper rabble-rouser like Yorinobu. He's not unlike his dad in that way, of being like, fine, I'll prove you wrong, I'll do it myself. Saburo leaves Japan with Hanako, with the plan of confronting Yorinobu about this theft. Hanako did try to convince her father to let her do the talking, but her father denied her request. Hanako had been trying for years up to this point to get her brother to accept his role in their family. She tried to hold her father and brother together for decades, but that rope was frayed beyond repair. During this confrontation, Yorinobu snaps and strangles his father. Maybe his hatred had boiled over in this moment now that he had his father so close and so vulnerable. But maybe Yorinobu's fear of him had finally driven him to this point. Strangulation is a very personal and passionate way of taking someone out, and I think that this action went beyond just the level of father versus son. I think it was something much deeper. The reason why I think Yorinobu was mortally terrified of his father is not just because of the power his father wielded, but I think it's because Yorinobu knew that he was supposed to be a vessel for his father. That is what the ultimate purpose of the relic was. I don't think Yorinobu knew about this from the beginning, all the way back in his early 20s. I can't see his dad choosing to spring that on him, knowing how individualistic Yorinobu was. Maybe Hanako is the one who told her brother in hopes that maybe she could get him to accept his role as a vessel instead of fight it. This explains why Saburo forgave Yorinobu for all the things that he did and ultimately welcomed him back into the fold, especially after Kei died, because this was the last tissue-compatible male relative he had, the last proper host. I think Yorinobu knew that this was to be his ultimate fate, should he fail to destroy Arasaka in time, and he lashed out and killed his dad in a mix of desperation, terror, and hatred. After all, this discussion takes a very harsh turn, with Saburo more or less resolving to punish his son in an unspoken way. So, if Yorinobu didn't do what he did, who knows what would have happened? I could totally see Takamura at full strength taking out or neutralizing Atom Smasher if it came to blows. Saburo could easily just give Atom Smasher whatever he wants to look the other way while he took Yorinobu out of action. After the murder, Yorinobu scrambles for damage control, blaming a mystery murderer for poisoning his father. He gets rid of Takamura, a huge threat, by sending him on a goose chase that would lead him to V. In the meantime, Yorinobu would get a grip on the reins of Arasaka. He would fabricate a very flimsy story as to what happened to his father, a story that everybody, including Hanako, doubted from the get-go. But everybody was largely powerless to do anything against Yorinobu. In Hanako's case, What held her back was her love for her brother, or so she says. In charge of Arasaka at long last, Yorinobu wasted no time in changing Arasaka for the, in his mind, better. He removed facilities, changed plans that were long laid out, flipped countless people's lives upside down, determined to remove Arasaka from its seat of world power. He still did everything he could, however, to keep up the premise of mourning, of his innocence in his father's death. He organized a parade in memory of his father, with his sister, Hanako, as the celebration's centerpiece. So long as Hanako appeared on the side of her brother, the Kiji faction, the traditionalists of Arasaka, wouldn't have as nearly a compelling figurehead to rally behind. Now, Yorinobu promised a long time ago, as we know, to free his sister from the shackled life she lived under her father. He still intends to do that, and he cares very deeply about her safety and comfort. When Hanako expresses to him that she feels like his puppet, with the parade and all the public repping she's being told to do, Yorinobu tells her that, if she wants to stop, he would never force her to continue. And I do believe he's being sincere. He knows that Hanako does hold a lot of power, but he's not interested in being just like their father, directing her here and there and just expecting her to follow along. As much value as she may present to his role at the top of Arasaka, he values her as his sister far more. He himself was terrified of life as a puppet, a literal puppet. A literal meat puppet. And he's strongly against the world his father desired to create. I can't see Yorinobu wanting to repeat that with the person he holds most dear. After Hanako is kidnapped, Yorinobu sends Atom Smasher to get her back. And while Smasher's not the first person I would assign to a rescue crew, given his nature and also his name, he's definitely scary enough to make people think twice about taking Hanako again. Yorinobu makes a public statement, threatening death to whoever seeks to harm another member of the family. But Hanako doesn't see this as a rescue attempt. She sees it as a capture, an attack, and indeed she kinda is captured. Basically, Hanako is stuck under guard of her brother's men after she is retrieved. Once again, never allowed to be alone, and unable to leave Arasaka Manor for more than that visit to Embers. A visit that can last forever, depending on V's choices. Hanako feels, already, like she's under threat because of her brother. She is, again, a prisoner of somebody else in her family, all in a world that is rapidly changing from the Arasaka that she's always known. Hanako once swore to herself that when her father eventually died, she would live the way she wanted to. Yet now that her father was dead by murder at the hands of her brother, she was now being denied her chance to live the way she wanted to. I do think Yorinobu wanted to keep her safe, as well as to keep her away from those who wanted to use her politically, but all this did was backfire and make her determined to stop him. Even if it meant she'd be back in her golden cage, at least it would still be the same golden cage as before, not in a world where all there was of Arasaka was ashes. Also, with this bit of him taking away Hanako's freedom in an effort to give her, and I guess himself, a degree of freedom too, I'm kind of forced to ask, how important was Hanako's freedom to him in the end anyway? Was it more important than his own? Was it ever? In a way, in the shoes of the Arasaka CEO, which kind of makes me think of the giant robe that he's wearing at the end. It's like, it's way too big, but he's forced to be in this role where he now has to make these giant decisions that his father did. I can't help but look at it like, I think he does care about Hanako's freedom more than his own. It's just, he kind of feels like he has no other choice but to imprison his sister against his own promise to himself that he would never become this monster that his father was. And in that sense, he sort of sealed his own fate should you choose the devil ending. It's an unfortunate misunderstanding and lack of communication between Hanako and Yorinobu, but also I can't blame him for not communicating with Hanako because Hanako is brainwashed, in my opinion. So I doubt it would have made that much of a difference. I don't know, again, his whole story is just tragic. In the meantime, Yorinobu is trying to speedrun Arasaka's rapid decline. Yes, I said it, he's speedrunning rapid decline. He's really trying really hard right now. He knows. He can feel the walls closing in around him. His story is crumbling. It's basically nothing. There's people pursuing him. His sister is making her own plans. And I think he knows that Hanako is loyal to her father's memory, but I don't think he realized exactly that his dad was in Mikoshi. I feel like he would have destroyed it. Yorinobu makes a plan for a full military coup of the company, and this includes ordering his Taka faction to take out all the rival factions throughout Arasaka all across the world. It's full-blown civil war at this point. He's panicking and things are looking shaky as shit for him at the moment. Now, from here on out, there are two ways the story goes for Yorinobu. The first way is that he mostly succeeds in his mission. In every ending but the devil ending, he deals immense damage to Arasaka. While he doesn't entirely destroy the company, the corporation loses a lot of its former power and wealth, and its relic program falls apart. This bit regarding the fall of the relic program actually makes me wonder if Yorinobu did indeed know of his potential as a vessel, and if he is the one who put Johnny on the relic prototype. Maybe he did so both to annihilate the chip for his own safety, and also chose Johnny's engram as a middle finger to his dad. Johnny was a pain in the ass for Saburo. Probably not as much as Johnny believes he was, as we know that Johnny is not the most reliable narrator, but it would still be an extra dig that the chip would be wasted on Johnny, of all people. In these endings, however, Hanako also dies in her own failed coup that would have otherwise succeeded with V's involvement. And Yorinobu is pretty devastated. Despite everything, he loved his sister, and I'm sure he feels like he failed her in regards to giving her the freedom that he promised he would someday deliver her to. And in a way, death is sort of the only freedom she does get, considering what happens in the devil ending. And that's very dark, but it is the dark truth of Hanako Arasaka. In the devil ending, Yorinobu's life ends horribly in a twisted half-death. He is ultimately defeated, and by time V gets to him, he's on his knees, wearing a sweeping robe of black. It's not entirely unlike the posture and appearance of a samurai preparing for seppuku. But there's less of that ceremony that it's often depicted in art and whatnot. He's done. He's broken. Yorinobu has a gun by his side, but he says that the one bullet in it isn't for V. But he can't even pick it up to do what I'm sure he was intending to do with it. Yorinobu didn't enjoy any of what he did at the top of Arasaka. It was necessary, but it wasn't something he relished. Yorinobu doesn't ultimately take his life, but instead lays his head in his sister's lap. The lap of that person who was most precious to him, saying that she always appeared when things were at their worst, almost like she was always there to soothe him. She was the one saving grace and silver lining of any bad situation. As V staggers away after Hellman, Yorinobu tells Hanako that he is simply tired, and as she tells him to rest, she slips a familiar chip into his neck. I found somebody on YouTube who zoomed in and found this animation, which is otherwise really hard to see, and I'll put it on screen here with credit to the user. It's crazy. It's just like, there it is. But I love how the chip just kind of like goes woo up the screen when I guess the elevator goes down. That made me laugh. Eventually we see the results of this moment of defeat. Yorinobu's body is on the news, but it is his father's words that come out of his mouth. Saburo Arasaka announces that he has returned after Yorinobu gracefully handed over the reins of his flesh to his esteemed father. All of this occurred through the golden fingertips of his dear sister, who he came so close to delivering to ultimate freedom, alongside himself. But I don't want to end the ending discussion of this video with that, because in the Phantom Liberty ending, he gets a very fitting ending, one that's not unlike the star ending that V can get. By time 2079 rolls in, Yorinobu is kicked out of the company by the board, who identify him as an internal saboteur, and he runs away with a band of nomads, maybe even his steel dragons for all we know. And while he mourns the loss of his sister, he can at least live on as a more free man, with the knowledge that he did take Arasaka down more than a few pegs, even if he couldn't ultimately destroy it. Now, to end this video, I want to highlight just how important perspective is in Cyberpunk 2077, especially when it comes to Yorinobu. I mean, perspective is the most important narrative function in our brains. That's how we view the world, from our own perspectives, but I just love how Cyberpunk used that to both trick us, but also to make the game even more interesting on subsequent playthroughs. As V, we are the protagonist. As V, we seek to save ourselves, and find ourselves placed at odds with this guy who, as V always says with disgust, killed his own father. As V, we play as a character with a deep distaste for corpos. Whether we're nomad, street kid, or former corpos ourselves, V don't like them rich kids. And honestly, there's not a lot of in-game reasons to like them anyway. Not even Meredith, at least from our perspective as people in the streets. We see firsthand the damage corporate dominion does to everyday people. We see the huge canyon between rich and poor. We see the filth and death and violence in the streets. We see people struggling to survive in the dirt of Earth while people look down on them from space. We see how unfair life is for V, for Jackie, for Misty. Pretty much every character we can meet in this game is depicted in a tragic struggle against the world around them. And their stories almost always end with the city winning every time, and these people just end up at most taking the small comforts they can. Such is life. All V sees throughout their story and throughout their life is the people at the top. The people who keep people like them down in the dirt. And yeah, especially on a first playthrough, it's super easy to get caught up in that me versus you way of thinking. But it's only when we do the devil ending and go against our better judgment, when we side with the corpo machine, which predictably backfires, that we see Yorinobu is someone who's not all that different from V. Yorinobu may have been born in the lap of luxury, but he despised the corporate machine his father presented. We see someone who fought against great odds, seeking success at great personal risk. We see someone whose very soul is threatened throughout his story, if not just by the relic, but by the moral conflicts within himself. We see how Yorinobu reacts to killing his own father, too. He's not happy or cold about this. He's shocked. He's terrified, and he's like, oh god, what the fuck have I just done? That's because he's not a sociopath. He's not a saint either, but he's able to care. Yorinobu loses his father in Konpeki Tower regardless of how he felt about the man, and that's still, for any human, a horrible loss and experience. V fights great odds in search of their own version of success. V's soul is being torn apart, both by the love and loss that persists throughout their story, as well as the relic rewriting their very person. They're being jerked around, not sure of any of what they're doing, driven only by the drive to survive, but also torn by the limited decisions they face, the costs that they have. V lost Jackie at Konpeki Tower, their best friend, when they were so close to having everything. And then V loses their own life, only to get revived with Johnny in their head. Both V and Yorinobu desperately want to live, against all odds. And while sure, neither character ends up with their goal perfectly completed, considering Arasaka isn't exactly completely destroyed in any of these endings, and for V always loses something no matter what they choose. They still kind of get somewhere a little better in every ending but the devil ending. They both have their own possible star ending, where they flee with the nomads. And they can both lose everything and die in despair, together, in a way, in the devil ending. An ending where they are betrayed by the one person who could, if they wanted to, if they cared to, choose to help them. But instead, chose to make everything both these characters did all for naught. Yorinobu is not an evil person, just as V is not a saint. Both characters, in another world, another life, could have worked together. And they probably could have somehow succeeded in both of their goals, in the way that none of their endings as enemies ever do. They might have even been good friends. And that is a future that we will, unfortunately, never see. Such is the tragedy of history, even in speculative fiction. Thank you very much for watching this deep dive on Yorinobu Arasaka. I gotta say, Yorinobu just makes me sad, man. As much as I love the points of the devil ending, like it hits in such a terrible way. It's so well done. I feel so bad for Yorinobu. I never want to do the devil ending again for that reason. Like, I can deal with V dying, but the idea of your own sister shoving your dad's personality in your head, deleting your mind and everything, like, that's a whole other level of, oh my god, that's horrific. Oh my god. Yeah, let me know what you think of Yorinobu as well. Do you wish that there was a way we could have helped him? I mean, I understand why we couldn't. It's the perfect little chef's kiss of tragedy to the story of Cyberpunk, to find out that the person that you thought was your big obstacle was actually somebody who probably would have listened to you and maybe even tried to help you. Like, that's the crazy thing to me. I can't not think of Yorinobu was probably the most likely Arasaka, maybe, to have been kind enough or as good enough a person to maybe actually help V. Anyway, that's my tangent about that. God, thank you very, very much to my members. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. Also, members, I will say, Mikularest001, a comment you left on my Hanako video will be featured heavily in the Saburo video because I love the point and theory you made in your comment. I'm just saying that, so if you want to seek out the comment, it's in the Hanako video comment section. Go read it. It was fascinating. I will see all of you in the next one. Thank you for watching, guys, and have a good one. Goodbye!